So first, let me thank lots of folks from HIBAR, but especially Lauren and Michelle, both great ways of helping me orient to this opportunity to talk with you, and also a lot of technical help. And the HIBAR management group that spoke with me about a month ago to help me think about all of this, you'll see that I'm going to try to get us work from my experiences into the kind of conversation that all of you want to have. So I've worked with a lot of colleagues, as Scott says, and everything I'll say today is really the result of great collaboration, both inside universities and what you would call cross-sectoral collaboration. And I'm just going to jump right in, see if I can do this. Okay, so the world is full of what some people call wicked problems. You could spend a lot of time trying to define what that means. I'll just say simply that they're actually quite hard to define the problems. Not everybody agrees. They tend to involve multiple causal pathways. They're not just about the facts, but the values. And so they're way too complicated for the kind of linear approach to research that's kind of in isolation from the rest of the world that universities are pretty good at or have been over the years. So we're going to have to do some other things too, right? And you only have to look at the pandemic, globalization, poverty, climate change to think about wicked problems. And by the way, all four of those have connections, right? Pretty complicated. I'm not the only person who in my career has felt like I feel like I've done work that ought to make a difference, but not exactly getting there. And so the question is, what would we need to do different? Well, there are an awful lot of different research strategies out there that are meant to come to grips with more complicated societal problems. And HIBAR is one of those, but I did a quick summary of a few that were off top of mind for me, but I could put down another 10. And some have been around a long time, some more recent. There are overlaps between them, but there's some discrete parts. I'll just say that the work that my colleagues and I do, we draw on a lot of these, and we kind of tailor them to the specific problem context on which we work. The Mitchell Center chose to work on problems that were neither as big as the whole world nor too small. The kind of middle ground was sustainability challenges for a variety of reasons, but these are challenges, you can get a sense from the word cloud here, that are at their essence about the connections between society and nature and the well-being of people and the natural world. Those themselves, of course, are strongly connected. And so there's a lot to be considered, not just the kind of scientific parts, but the worldviews, values, preferences, knowledge and know-how of our partners, these cross-sectoral organizations that you guys are all thinking about. To engage with stakeholders, and that's the word I'll use here, which is pretty broad. I have a wonderful colleague in Linda Silka, who's a social and community psychologist. We've worked together for a long time. And she's an expert in engaged research and university community partnerships. So she wrote this paper with a bunch of questions. Where do you start? How do you grow the partnership? How to decide what will be studied? In other words, a researcher might come at this in a totally different way than a partner would. Obviously, the cultures of research are very different than if you live in state government or in a non-governmental organization. In my experience, people within universities, including myself, I've had a lot of basic funding from the National Science Foundation during my career. When I was doing that work, I could have kept studying things forever. There was always more to figure out about how nature worked. But I found that a lot of our partners are anxious to get solutions, right? So how do we do that? Who gets credit for it? Who owns the data? All of these kinds of questions. Now, Linda, again, in this paper, gave some examples of things that don't always go smoothly, that a researcher arrives in these kinds of partnerships with a pretty clear idea of what the important research question should be. Here's the state of the art in my field. That doesn't necessarily align well with what stakeholders are concerned with. They might have just different goals. They want to advance their career and advance the field, and stakeholders want solutions to problems that they're grappling with as we speak. This question of urgency is a big deal, and I think this can work in several ways. Sometimes our partners want answers yesterday, but I'll tell you in a little bit, in our partnerships with tribal communities, I think there are times when we're actually going too fast and we need to slow down. So those temporal kind of contexts matter too. I've certainly been in many conversations in my career within the universities where, to be honest, some faculty look down their noses at working on real world problems. It isn't as prestigious as pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, advancing theory. And that's a kind of interesting tension that is definitely something we're going to have to figure out as we go along. So at this stage in my talk, I'm actually going to illustrate what we've learned. We've done over 100 different projects, but a lot of them are connected. But I'm going to stick with two today to just illustrate some of the challenges and opportunities, some of what we've learned along the way, and some of what we still need to learn. A colleague of mine, Cindy Eisenhower, who's down in the lower left with pretty long blonde hair, I guess, and a blue top. Forgot to put a circle around her, but Cindy is an anthropologist. She came by my office shortly after she arrived at the university, actually wanted to work on some water issues, couldn't quite figure out how to get started on that. And in the course of that conversation, she told me more about her background and a real strong interest in sustainable consumption. Obviously, there's a huge amount of consumption in the world that is generating a lot of waste. And so the question of whether we could create more circular economies is a big interest of hers. And we got to talking about it. And it wasn't just that it was a general interest, but there were immediate needs for this kind of expertise in Maine, where we could see that we were having problems with solid waste that was overflowing our landfills or going to incinerators. Neither of those are really great ways to deal with waste. And some of the capacity for both of those ways of dealing with waste was increasingly limited. There were proposals in the state to open a new landfill immediately adjacent to a tribal reservation near the university. Lots of concern on the part of lots of stakeholders. And it led us to really want to assemble a team. And if in that lower left picture, I won't tell you everybody, but from left to right, you have an economist, a food scientist, a woman who's now a postdoc, a nurse, a social psychologist, an anthropologist, an environmental engineer, and me, an ecologist. So this team was important because we had to look at all the different dimensions of trash. One of the things that we did was waste characterization, like what's in trash and why are people throwing stuff away? Well, it turns out in our area and in a lot of parts of the United States, something like 30 to 40% of the waste stream is food waste and organic waste. And that is not only meaning that we're not using the food, it's going to landfills where it generates methane as it decomposes, which is a potent greenhouse gas. And I don't know about all the places where you live and work, but Maine isn't the only place that has a very serious food insecurity problem. So we have a lot of families and children that aren't getting enough to eat. How is it that we're throwing away a lot of food that's creating these kinds of problems and also failing to help solve our food insecurity problems? So this is one of these wicked problems. By the way, wicked problems are a thing where trying to fix one part of it often makes another part worse. It has unintended consequences. So lots of systems thinking is required. One of the things as we grew our capacity for this kind of work, and in the middle picture there, we had lots of meetings of different kind of stakeholders. I remember sitting at one of these summit meetings of people from around the state, and I was just happened to be sitting between a tribal member and a member of the biggest company that is responsible for managing landfills. And because that company wanted to open a new landfill immediately next to the tribal reservation with the guy sitting on the other side of me that was a member of that tribe, there was a lot of tension. And yet people came together and talked. One reason they talked with us is because they trusted us. And I'll tell you more about that in a sec. But we brought folks together. We started to hear what their priorities were. They talked about the problems, but they also had ideas for solutions. And this led us to become kind of the go-to organization in the state of Maine for state government and others who valued our willingness to look at trade-offs of different ways of dealing with solid waste, but also not trying to take sides, letting the values play out, but we tried to be a kind of a neutral party there. One of the things it's led to in just a few short years is a really ambitious campaign. I think it's innovative certainly in the region in the northeast of the US, but also nationally, that is to getting food waste out of landfills. We're working with the waste industry. We're working with grocery stores, restaurants, food pantries, state legislature, federal government, lots of partners and tribes, by the way, on this. And so this is something where we've actually built a lot of capacity, and I'll sort of summarize some of the key steps in this a little bit later when I wrap up. So that's one kind of partnership. There's a very different one that we've also been involved in. We are on the traditional territory of a number of tribal nations. In Maine, we have 4 federally recognized tribes, the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and Maliseet. When I arrived in Maine, within a very short amount of time, I went to meet with some tribal leaders. And let's just say I came away from that experience recognizing that the university had not always been a good partner to tribes. It hadn't always been interested in their problems and approached these collaborations with respect, valuing the knowledge they bring over the millennia that they've been here on this land. Long story short, I thought we're going to need some help bridging the world of the university and indigenous communities if we want to work together. And I reached out to Darren Ranko, who's, this is a slide from a talk he gave recently at MIT. Darren at the time was a professor at an Ivy League university. And I had reason to think he might be willing to come to leave a wonderful, prestigious university like that, partly because some very prestigious universities actually are more interested in what you might call scholarly work and less interested in some of the real world outcomes. But I had reasons to think that Darren really cared about those real world outcomes. One reason, he's Penobscot. And so coming home to Maine was a big deal for him. And he and I and many others have been working together for nearly 15 years now. So even though Darren has one foot in the tribal world and one foot in the academic world, and I assume that meant he knew everything that you'd need to know about the tribes, when we began working with tribes, even he was learning some important things. We knew that basket making is an important economically, culturally, the creation story of the Wabanaki people. Wabanaki refers to multiple tribes. Wabanaki translates as people of the dawn. That these people, the baskets are ways of telling stories. They build kinship, but their creation story is linked to the brown ash that is an important material for basket making. And when Darren started to build university tribal collaborations, he was totally surprised to learn that basket makers' biggest concern was something that was literally off on the horizon, the potential arrival of a really damaging forest insect pest, the emerald ash borer. And so one of the things that we've learned in this work is that you might start off thinking there's one kind of a problem, but along the way, what the problem is changes, and you have to be flexible about how to work on it. In this case, we knew that the emerald ash borer was likely to come to Maine. There was actually no way of eradicating this pest based on what's happened elsewhere. Nonetheless, we wanted to do everything we could to be prepared for it and be resilient. So the partners for this project included indigenous basket makers, tribes, state and federal agencies. What could we do to adapt to the expected arrival, which, by the way, didn't arrive right away, but arrived about, 4 years ago. So it's now here affecting our brown ash trees that are the source of this basket making material. As part of a long collaboration now, way over 10 years, how to coordinate quarantine plans when the pest is detected, how to locate basket quality trees before they're damaged by the pests, how to document traditional gathering methods, how to gain access to private lands. Maine has very little public land and the tribes don't have a lot of land. What else can we do to have basket making materials as the forest is damaged? So a really great research team. This is just an example of a meeting where you have in the foreground, far left is someone from a federal agency that's responsible for quarantining land. Right next to him is Teresa Secord, who was the head of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, and then a member of the state government who's an expert in forest pests. All of these folks trying to figure out how to work together. And I got to tell you, if the federal government quarantines land, but they want to do that on tribal land, this is very complicated because tribes are sovereign nations. So we were told that one of the things that was helpful about holding these meetings at the Mitchell Center is that we kind of created safe spaces where people could work together more productively. And here's a quote about the way these power dynamics can become so important. As soon as researchers become concerned with action, decision-making, and change, power can no longer be ignored as it's intimately entwined with the ability to act. So this is a big deal. This is as part of the more than 10 years that we've been working together on issues like this. This is a paper that came out last year. Of the 12 authors on this paper, 8 are tribal members. And there's a lot in this, what we've learned here that we write about, that's about power and justice in this collaboration, which has unique characteristics relative to some of our other collaborations. Just to remind you, if it wasn't already apparent, getting the science right is nowhere close to sufficient. Stakeholder trust and agreement may be more important to effective evidence-based decision-making for wicked problems than high levels of scientific rigor and certainty. That's very much been our experience. So what have we learned? Like, what are these dispositions that help for collaboration? Humility, in other words, we don't have all the answers. Flexibility, the willingness to shift and change directions, back up, start over, go around obstacles. Patience, which is that funny thing about, are we in a hurry or do we need to wait? We certainly don't want to get ahead of our partners, but sometimes they're way ahead of us. Risk tolerance is pretty important, and creating safe spaces for people to take those risks. Humor comes in pretty handy, and boy, is it important to do this work for the long haul. There aren't any quick fixes to wicked problems. Because this involves working with people, we bring a lot of social science and other expertise to this work, and we have many faculty for whom this is part of their research, is to study what works and doesn't work in these kind of collaborations. When we've published over 60 papers on this, I'd be glad to share those. We've got a web page that has them all listed as we update them, but a lot of wonderful colleagues. We practice this all the time. We have lots of students, so we are always training them, and that helps train us as faculty to go out and do this kind of work. There were some questions for the breakouts that I'm going to cover real quickly here, just to help maybe get things started for your conversation. How do you get started on this kind of cross-sectoral collaboration? We think it helps to pay attention to real world problems and not just read from journals. The Mitchell Center helps with matchmaking. Which stakeholders might you want to get to know? And then spend time with them. We invite them in to give talks. We have our students do internships with them, which helps us get to know them better. Our partners have knowledge and know-how that we don't have. We launch a lot of pilot projects. So we funded over 100 seed grants, and these can be quite small, but people still get going on them. To do a lot to give recognition to both researchers and partners. We give out awards, we get media coverage. We make sure the senior leadership at the university knows about this. We help with proposals. We have written 3 proposals to NSF. The total funding was $32 million. Trust me, when you have to produce a 300-page proposal, it pretty much would kill any normal faculty member. So we pitch in and do a lot of the heavy lifting on that ourselves, and then we help manage it. And helping faculty to get credit for engaged research, what I really mean there is we help them navigate the promotion and tenure process. Every single faculty member who's worked on this has gotten promotion and tenure so far. So nobody's paid a big price for it yet. Governance issues I know you're concerned about. I won't say much here, but we have used memorandum of an understanding and other kind of shared governance procedures, but I think there's a lot to learn here. I could come back to the honest broker role later. Development of collaborative attitudes and skills. I'll just say that we were told, oh, you should bring in consultants to help you do this. And we thought it was actually preferable to grow our own capacities for facilitation, mediation, conflict resolution. Our faculty are good at this. Now our students are good at this. We do partner with other boundary organizations like Cooperative Extension and Sea Grant. Oh yeah, and here's the last one. I don't know the last time you've walked into a university building and seen an ethos on the wall, but we have one, and here it is. There's a picture of Senator Mitchell and this quote from him: "The ethos of the Mitchell Center reflects one of my deepest beliefs, the importance of public service. The center's faculty and students have committed themselves to a goal larger than their individual lives, the goal of helping build a better world." And turns out that's actually pretty big motivation for a lot of the people that work on our project. So I'll stop there. Thank you all. And I look forward to being part of the listening in the breakouts, and happy to talk with anybody anytime.